In the brutal winter of 1944, Hitler's final, desperate gamble was not thwarted by tanks or sheer numbers, but by a hidden technological marvel, a secret fuse, turning the very air above the Ardennes into a merciless, unseen graveyard for his elite. This wasn't merely a battle, it was a collision of ambition and innovation, where the future of warfare was forged in the freezing snow, and the final, audacious plan of the Third Reich met its shocking end not on the ground, but from the sky, rewritten by a tiny, invisible revolution. December 16, 1944. The Ardennes forest, a landscape of frozen silence, lay blanketed in snow. For years, German soldiers had grown accustomed to the brutal rhythm of artillery, the distant shriek, the concussive impact into frozen earth, the desperate moments of frantic cover. But this morning, a chilling new terror descended. The first American shells screamed overhead, yet defied all expectations. They never struck the ground. Instead, they detonated high above the treetops, tearing the frigid sky apart with blinding, ear-splitting flashes. Steel fragments, like an invisible, deadly rain, poured down from above, slicing through branches, earth, and flesh with merciless precision. Foxholes, once a sanctuary, offered no protection. The thick, ancient trees, no shelter. Death, unexpected and inescapable, rained down from the heavens, making old rules obsolete. For the advancing men of the 326th Volksgrenadier Division, pushing through deep snow toward Monschau, this new reality was a nightmare beyond comprehension. They had faced artillery before, understood its brutal logic of predictable impacts and safe zones. But now, the very air had become a weapon. The familiar shriek of incoming shells was no longer followed by explosions on distant Earth, but by savage, instantaneous detonations directly overhead. Entire squads vanished in an instant. Seasoned soldiers collapsed in ditches, shredded by unseen forces. The ancient, snow-laden forest, once a natural shield, transformed into a relentless killing field, echoing with screams of confusion and the metallic hiss of descending shrapnel. This wasn't war, it was an execution from the sky. On the American side, amidst the hellish chaos, one man grappled with an impossible choice. Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the 406th Artillery Group watched in horror as his small 38th Cavalry Squadron was being swallowed whole by overwhelming German numbers. He knew conventional artillery would be too slow, too inaccurate to stem this savage tide. Following standard orders meant certain annihilation for his men. In that frozen, desperate moment, with the front line on the brink of collapse, Axelson made a decision that defied every military protocol, risking not just his career, but a court-martial, and potentially the entire war effort. He gave a direct, audacious order: load shells tipped with the Allies' most closely guarded secret, the proximity fuse. The fate of his men, and perhaps the battle, hung on his desperate gamble. This wasn't just another shell, it was a revolution in warfare. Concealed within its unassuming nose was a tiny radar system, allowing it to see its target and detonate precisely in mid-air. The effect was instantaneous, devastating, and utterly terrifying. For the hardened German veterans, whose entire training and survival instincts hinged on the predictable physics of conventional war, the old rules had suddenly, shockingly evaporated. They spoke in hushed, frightened tones. The shells had eyes. They swore, convinced an unseen force was hunting them. The very mathematics of death had been irrevocably rewritten in the brutal, snow-choked forests of the Ardennes, breeding a new, profound fear. To truly grasp the stakes of this desperate battle, we must rewind to the final, desperate months of 1944. Adolf Hitler, his Third Reich crumbling, cities burning, and armies reeling on two fronts, clung to a delusion. He envisioned one final, audacious stroke to reverse the tide of war, code named Wat am Rhein. Watch on the Rhine. It was a plan born of sheer desperation, a massive, secret surprise offensive through the seemingly quiet Ardennes. Over 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and nearly 2,000 artillery pieces were meticulously assembled under the cloak of fog and forest. Their objective: to smash through Allied lines, seize the vital port of Antwerp and fracture the Western Front, forcing a negotiated peace. Hitler, ever the fantasist, promised victory. Tragically, Hitler's delusion wasn't entirely baseless. American intelligence had failed spectacularly, completely missing the massive German buildup. Many Allied units in the Ardennes were either green recruits, fresh from training or battle, weary veterans sent to this quiet sector for rest. They were utterly unprepared for the storm that was about to break. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, a deafening barrage of 600 German rounds per minute thundered across an 85-mile front. The surprise was absolute. Communications shattered. Entire American regiments were overwhelmed in the sudden, savage onslaught. Yet, even as the Wehrmacht surged forward, a stubborn American defiance began to emerge, holding critical crossroads and bridges. And it was in this maelstrom of chaos, facing imminent collapse, that Colonel Axelson made his fateful choice, unleashing America's most secret weapon. This incredible weapon, the proximity fuse, was born not in the trenches, but in America's secret labs. On the surface, it looked like any other shell. But it carried a revolutionary secret. Inside each one, a tiny radar system allowed it to see its target and detonate precisely in mid-air. For years, scientists had worked on this impossible concept, overcoming immense challenges to miniaturize radar and make it survive the violence of a cannon blast. Ironically, German engineers had prototypes as early as 1940, but Hitler, demanding quick victories, shelved the project, deeming it too complex. This fateful decision cost them dearly, as America perfected what Germany abandoned, turning the very air above the battlefield into a lethal, inescapable killing field. Back at Monchaux, Colonel Axelson's audacious order reverberated through the American gun lines. Load the new shells. His gunners hesitated for a breath, fully aware of the stakes. If captured, the Allies' most vital secret would be exposed. If they failed, Axelson faced court-martial. But the line was collapsing, his men dying. With grim determination, shells with their hidden radar, yes, slid into the breaches. The lanyards were pulled, the guns roared. What followed was a spectacle of horror and confusion the Germans had never witnessed. Advancing in tight formations, they were suddenly enveloped by fire that defied all logic. Explosions erupted 30 to 50 feet above them, showering steel downward, turning once safe ditches and foxholes into inescapable death traps. Veterans of Stalingrad and Kursk found their vast experience utterly useless against this unseen enemy. Their lives were extinguished in seconds by explosions that came from the sky. Panic and unadulterated terror ripped through the German ranks. Bewildered and frantic reports flew up the chain of command. German veterans, who had faced everything from the deserts of Africa to the frozen steppes of Russia, swore the shells had eyes, hunting them even behind cover. Was it a new, unimaginable gas? Some dark arcane sorcery? No rational explanation made sense of the horror raining down from a clear sky. The meticulously planned offensive, once surging forward, stalled dramatically. It then began to falter under the psychological weight of this invisible, merciless onslaught. The fear of the unseen enemy, and the utter helplessness against it, proved more potent than any physical barrier. The devastating impact of the proximity fuse spread like wildfire across the entire Ardennes front. At Bastogne, the legendary 101st Airborne Division found themselves completely surrounded and massively outnumbered, yet they clung desperately to the vital crossroads. Their salvation, however, came not from conventional reinforcements, but from their artillery units, crucially, including the courageous African-American gunners of the 969th Field Artillery Battalion. These men, often fighting against prejudice, now delivered salvation. Firing the revolutionary proximity, fused shells, they ripped German infantry apart before they could even close the distance. Fields that moments before teemed with marching troops became silent, grisly landscapes of bodies. Against all odds, bolstered by this unseen weapon and these unsung heroes, the siege of Bastogne held. Further north, at the critical Elsenborn Ridge, the battle reached a brutal, bloody zenith. Hitler had thrown his absolute best into the fight. The formidable 6th SS Panzer Army, including the elite Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler Division, stormed the steep, forested slopes with fanatical resolve, their reputation for invincibility preceding them. Over 3 agonizing days, a staggering 160,000 shells rained down. Crucially, only a quarter of these carried the proximity fuse, yet these relatively few rounds accounted for more than half of all German casualties. Entire SS companies, once believed unbreakable, vanished in concussive blasts that transformed the snow-covered slopes into grisly killing fields. Survivors, forced to climb over the mangled bodies of their own comrades, were swept away by the next merciless airburst. The Waffen-SS, trained to believe in their own invincibility, shattered completely against this invisible, unrelenting fire from the sky, their myth broken forever. By December 21st, the undeniable evidence of the proximity fuse's effectiveness led to a pivotal decision. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself authorized its full, unrestricted deployment. Proximity fuses were rushed to every artillery unit across the Ardennes. Self-propelled howitzers, like the formidable M7 Priests, unleashed them in relentless, devastating barrages. The African-American gunners of the 969th Artillery Battalion, often overlooked, carved their place in history with devastating salvos that sealed Bastogne's perimeter. Everywhere this revolutionary weapon appeared, German momentum died. The dense forest, once their shield, became a death trap as shells burst above the trees, filling the air with lethal shards of metal and splintered wood. For the Wehrmacht, there was no answer. Spreading out exposed them to wider kill zones. Clustering together meant annihilation. No tactic, no courage, no training could withstand it. In the Ardennes, the Germans faced American science, industry, and resolve forged into a single, terrifying device. The proximity fuse had arrived, and its judgment was final death from above. Christmas night 1944, a pale moon cast a faint glow on the snow along the Sauer River. German troops, believing the darkness and fog offered perfect concealment, began their silent crossing of the frozen waters. They moved quietly, weapons raised, anticipating a surprise attack on the American bank. But what awaited them was not the familiar, forgiving rhythm of artillery corrections, no warning whistles of shells striking too far or too short. Instead, it was sudden, precise, and merciless destruction. Shells detonated in the air directly above the river, transforming the crossing into an unimaginable slaughter. General George S. Patton, driving his Third Army north to relieve Bastogne, witnessed this devastation firsthand. He later documented 702 German bodies after a single barrage, an entire battalion erased in minutes. The river behind them, enemy fire in front, and death descending from above. The proximity fuse had turned the Sauer River into a mass graveyard. At Bastogne, the story was tragically the same. German infantry, emboldened after demanding surrender from the legendary General Merciless, to which he famously replied, "Nuts," advanced across the open, snowy fields. But as the enemy attacked proximity, fused shells burst overhead, scything through entire formations with terrifying efficiency. Snow-covered fields that moments before had been alive with marching troops became instant landscapes of silence and bodies. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery and the 969th Field Artillery, with their African-American gunners fighting with relentless precision, laid down an impenetrable curtain of steel. No German soldier could penetrate this aerial firestorm. Against overwhelming odds, the siege held. The vital crossroads of Bastogne remained defiantly in American hands. Then came January 1st, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte, Baseplate. In a desperate, final gamble to cripple Allied air power, 900 German fighters rose at dawn, striking Allied airfields across the front. The surprise was complete. Many Allied aircraft burned on the ground. But as the Luftwaffe pilots returned, American anti-aircraft batteries were waiting. Their shells, now armed with proximity fuses, no longer searched blindly for targets. They burst in the air with uncanny, lethal timing, transforming aerial defense into a brutal massacre. Of the 277 German aircraft lost that desperate day, an astonishing 172 were brought down by this unseen air-bursting fire. The Luftwaffe, already bleeding and exhausted, never recovered from this crushing blow. It was the last great air assault of the Third Reich, and it ended in utter ruin, signaling the ultimate demise of German air superiority. Across the entire Ardennes, one undeniable truth emerged. The weapon that had once seemed impossible had irrevocably reshaped the battlefield. General Patton himself, a man rarely given to understatement, famously declared, "The funny fuses won the battle of the Bulge for us." In the frozen forests, along the treacherous rivers and ridges, and in the very skies above Europe, the climax of Hitler's desperate gamble had come. The German offensive, launched with such audacious ambition, was now drowning in a storm of steel that detonated not where it landed, but precisely where it killed the most. Hitler's last, desperate throw of the dice was unraveling, not solely against American courage and tenacity, but decisively against the formidable power of American science and innovation. The tide had truly, irrevocably turned. When the thunder of guns finally began to fade, the Ardennes lay scarred and silent, a testament to the brutal fighting. Hitler's grand offensive, once envisioned as a decisive thrust to Antwerp, had bled itself dry against tenacious American resistance and, critically, superior American technology. The human cost was staggering: 100,000 German casualties, 75,000 American, with 19,000 Americans killed. Yet, hidden within these grim numbers lay another profound truth. Without the proximity fuse, the butcher's bill for the Allies would have been far, far higher. By the campaign's end, over 200,000 proximity fused shells had been fired. Post-battle studies revealed that despite comprising only a quarter of all artillery fired, they were responsible for over 60% of German casualties. Lethality had increased an astonishing 5 to 10 times. A single battery, once limited, could now halt an entire regiment. A single salvo could erase a company. The very mathematics of destruction had been rewritten by technology, and the balance of war irrevocably shifted. Yet, beyond the immediate battlefield statistics, lay deeper, more profound consequences that would shape the future. The factories that produced an astounding 22 million fuses during the war became unwitting schools of precision manufacturing. Techniques of miniaturization and exacting quality control, pioneered for this clandestine program, carried directly into the post-war world, fueling the burgeoning electronics industry. The ingenuity behind putting radar inside a shell led to breakthroughs that would one day guide satellites into orbit and power advanced sensing technologies. The complex logistics networks, built to coordinate over 100 companies in this secret effort, became the blueprint for modern global supply chains. Even the core philosophy, machines making autonomous decisions at the moment of impact, would evolve into guided missiles, cruise weapons, and eventually every smart bomb on the modern battlefield. The proximity fuse was undeniably the ancestor of them all, but the legacy of the proximity fuse was also deeply human. In America, thousands of factory workers, many of them women, toiled in secrecy on long shifts, meticulously soldering fragile circuits. They were never told what they were building, only that it mattered to the war effort. Meanwhile, in Germany, countless young soldiers, conscripts, students, boys barely grown, died in ways they could not possibly understand. They perished in forests where the trees themselves became deadly weapons, in rivers where the very air betrayed them, and in open fields where the sky rained steel. Their incomprehensible deaths marked the brutal passage into a new, merciless era of warfare, where the enemy was not always visible and safety became an illusion. The Battle of the Bulge itself finally ended in late January 1945. Hitler's last, desperate gamble had failed utterly, and the Third Reich would never recover from the blow. Yet, the echoes of those frozen weeks carried forward, forever altering military thinking. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, made a chilling admission. Had Germany possessed the proximity fuse on D-Day, the landings might have failed. Victory in Europe might have been delayed, or lost entirely. That was the true, terrifying measure of this invention. It wasn't just another shell, it was the definitive dividing line between old war and new. In the snow-covered silence of the Ardennes, a new age was born. The proximity fuse was more than mere steel and circuitry. It was irrefutable proof that science and technology could decisively tip the scales of history. fundamentally altering the trajectory of human conflict. From that brutal winter forward, every soldier who looked up at the sky understood a terrifying new reality: the air itself could kill, and the mathematics of death would never, ever be the same again.